All right, I want to welcome you to session 1 of the Discipler Orientation. I'm actually recording this live in my office. Session 2, if you look, that was recorded actually at a session with a group. This one, there's no audience here. But for those of you who missed the session, I wanted to have a chance for you to kind of see what I went through with them and also have a chance to see me, so you could see me down in the corner of your screen while the PowerPoint slides go by. The first thing that I want to say about being a discipler is that it is a big honor. You have been asked to be a part of an adolescent's life, and that is a big honor. One of the things about adolescence that's very important to understand is that trust is not something that is necessarily easy for them. It's something that they actually begin to ask themselves questions: who they trust and why do they trust that person. So for you to have been invited in is a big honor. So the person, the student who has chosen you, has identified you as somebody in their life who they respect and trust. So that is a big honor. I want to give you some history about the Discipler program, kind of how we got here and why. The first thing is that for teenagers, for actually any children, while they're still in the home, the parents and guardians are the single most important people in their life. No questions asked. However, during adolescence, there's a little change. There, in this transition period of adolescence, between where someone becomes from a child to being an adult, it changes somewhat. The parents still remain the most important. There's no dispute about that. But other influences, specifically other adults, become really, really significant. So part of the idea behind disciplers is that we would introduce people into their lives who could provide that validation. So here's an example. Teenagers will oftentimes hear something from their parents a lot, maybe even a dozen times, and they won't believe it, but they'll believe it as soon as somebody else says the same thing. I know I've had this happen to me, where parents have come up to me and said, Brian, I swear my kid trusts you more than they trust me, because I've been trying to tell them that they should do whatever. And for months they haven't listened. But the first time you mentioned it, they came home and thought it was a great idea. And it's not even that they trust me more, it's that I provide that validation. And that's kind of the role of other adults in the lives of adolescents. Your role is to make this student a priority in your life. They need to know that you are someone who has their best interest in mind, and they need to know that you are someone who is rooting for them. You are on their side. And also, you need to be somebody who they know that they can trust, and you need to be a model of Christian faithfulness. Now, the first 4 actually aren't all that difficult. Making a student a priority in your life, and when I talk about tips, and in session 2 I'll talk about that more, not actually all that difficult. Relatively easy to do in very simple, small ways. To be someone who they know has their best interest in mind, to be someone who they know is rooting for them, and to be someone who they know they can trust, all these things relatively easy to do. Not super simple, but not exceedingly difficult. Number 5, to be a model of Christian faithfulness. That's a little more difficult, something we all struggle with. But basically, what adolescents need to know is that there are adults outside of their parents who are rooting for them, who want to see them succeed, who are cheering for them, and who are looking out for them, because that provides a great sense of identity. This is session 1 of Discipler Orientation. We're just going to go over some basic info and do some helpful hints. And then in session 2, that's where I do the practical advice, how to be a discipler, any specific requirements that there may be. So, but here are my few hints for working with teenagers that I've learned after having done this now for 7 years. Number 1, find out what matters to teens. One of the great ways to connect with them is to have some sort of shared interest. Now, this could be any number of things, but find out what matters to them. So they may, for example, be huge fans of the Twilight books, and you may not really care at all about the Twilight books. But if that's something that's really important, if that's something they're really interested in, you should make it a priority to at least familiarize yourself with them. I'm not saying to become the world's biggest fan and read them all, but just find out about them a little bit. Find out what they are, what they talk about, so you have some kind of shared common base. That makes it much easier to connect with them. When you're talking with them, if they have a cell phone, make them shut it off. Adolescents today have developed a wonderful ability to text and talk, is what I call it, where they can sit there like this, and they can look at you, and they can text at the same time. The problem is they're still not fully engaged with you. They are partially engaged, but they're not fully engaged. So when you're talking to them, when you're spending time with them, when you're hanging out, make them shut off the phones. Connect with them through their means. For example, if they have a cell phone, Most early adolescents, most teenagers in general, love to communicate through text messages. There's good parts of that, there's bad parts about it, but that just kind of is how it is. And if you're on Facebook and they're on Facebook, connect with them through that. These electronic means of communication are becoming more and more the mainstay of how adolescents communicate, and it's one of the great ways that you can build that connection. Remember important dates, obviously their birthday, but if you find out about not so good dates, maybe a pet died or they lost a grandparent, remember those dates too. Those dates actually in some cases are more difficult for people, specifically adolescents, than are the good dates. So keep in mind those, because, and that also ties into number one a little bit about finding out what really matters to them. Ask open-ended questions. We're going to play a little game now of, is something a good question or a bad question to ask? How was school this week is actually a decent question because it's open-ended. It doesn't invite a yes or no answer. They can just say fine, or no big deal or whatever. But it's at least open-ended in some way. Anything exciting happened is a very bad question because the answer can simply be no, and that's the end of the conversation. Tell me one good thing that happened this week is a very good question because, one, it forces them to think, but it's not open-ended at all. It doesn't even say, a fine, it doesn't necessarily have a one-word answer except for nothing. Nothing good happened this week. In that case, tell me more about that. Tell me more about the nothing good that happened to you this week. One of the things, especially if you're working with guys, girls tend to be a little more open and chatty, but guys tend not to want to talk. And if you don't know your student particularly well, building that connection through conversation is going to be really key. One of the great ways to do it is to push them. Don't let them just say, oh, there was nothing good. Push them and say, okay, tell me about that nothing good. Tell me what it was that wasn't good about this week. They may laugh, but push them to answer the question. Earn their trust. I can't go over this enough. Adolescents, as I said at the outset, are wired to have trust issues. Part of what they are doing is they're figuring out who they can trust and who they can't. So while you've been invited into their life and that says something, it's easy to fall out. And you don't have absolute trust yet. So earn their trust the whole way along. Make sure that they know that they can trust you. That when you say you'll be there for them, you will. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. But make sure that make sure that you take the extra effort to earn their trust, because it's something that can be lost very easily, and this is how you do it. One of the things that I always talk about is keeping confidentiality. I'm going to give you a couple case studies here of situations where you should keep quiet and situations where you shouldn't keep quiet about confidential stuff, because one of the things that teenagers oftentimes do is they just kind of spill things. They just kind of say something to get your reaction. And sometimes adults don't know what they should do with that information. Like, should they tell someone, should they not? So here's a couple examples. This is primarily maybe something from a girl, but could have come from a boy too. My mom drives me crazy right now. She's always nagging me, and it seems like nothing I ever do is good enough. Well, please don't tell my mom I told you that. There is absolutely no good reason to ever tell their parents about that, mother or father, because it only invites conflict. It only betrays the trust that the student put in you. Because what the student is trying to do is the student is trying to express their frustration. They're trying to tell you how they're feeling. And if you turn around and then go blab to their parents and their parents get upset with them that they told you, it's just all bad in every way. So there's no reason to. The good follow-up to this is, well, what's going on? They want someone to listen to them as they kind of flesh out what's going on between them and their mom. They don't